Thank you all for joining us this evening for a vital panel discussion as we elevate the voices of our sisters. I am Starling Thomas, the Communications Director for the Ladies of Hope Ministries, and we have an epic vision to end poverty and incarceration of women and girls globally. Tonight's panel is brought to us by the Faces of Women in Prison program here at the LOHM. FOWI is a one-of-a-kind speakers bureau that trains justice-impacted women to become paid public speakers. For more information on how you can get involved and to book a speaker, visit the LOHM.org. Tonight, we are here for a very hard but very necessary conversation about the war on Black women and girls in this country. June is Black Lives Matter Month, a time dedicated to raising the important issue, and focuses on racism for what it is as a public health crisis. We see the now almost daily viral videos of police using excessive force against Black girls, such as in the case with Dejiria Becton, who survived a violent arrest during a Texas pool party, and Taylor Bracey, who was knocked unconscious and body slammed by a school police officer. Police sexual assault and abuse of Black women is often swept under the rug, as in with the case with Daniel Holtzclaw, who was eventually convicted of raping 13 women while on duty. With the death of Sandra Bland, who died in custody while in a Texas jail, Breonna Taylor, who was murdered in her home while sleeping, a Tatiana Jefferson, who was murdered in her home while babysitting her nephew, Geraldine Townsend, murdered in her home while police were serving an illegal drug sales warrant to her son, India Kager, who was murdered at a gas station with her 4-month-old baby in the backseat. We could be here all night if I continued to say their names. Black women have historically and continue to experience some of the highest rates of violence and sexual violence, highest rates of maternal mortality and stress-related medical conditions, and some of the highest rates of poverty and unemployment in this country. Black women also have the highest rates of stops, police violence, arrests, incarceration, and carceral control among women, and represent the fastest growing prison and jail population in the country. They bear the brunt of the financial impacts of mass incarceration. Black women have been subjected to a long history of reproductive control and are increasingly being denied as we see access to abortion and comprehensive reproductive and gender-affirming health services, and are primary targets of child welfare, policing, and the foster system. Tonight, we are talking about the over-policing of Black women and girls, state-sanctioned violence and system policing like CPS, and the laws that disproportionately affect women of color. Tonight, we have FOWI speakers, Nichka Granger and Nancy Fortunato. We also have joining us Shay McFarland, a former attorney and a 2021 Presidential Executive Clemency recipient. And lastly, we have Keita Haynes, author and criminal justice reform advocate. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us tonight. I want to jump right in. Nichka, in 1995, you were beaten by a police officer in a doctor's office in Texas. This was during a time when police violence was not a trending topic and there were no phones recording, and no one was going to know the truth about what happened, even though there were witnesses. Tell me about how that incident changed the trajectory of your life, and as a Black woman, how you felt going through the aftermath of police brutality and incarceration. I think she's frozen. 1 second. Okay, well, we will pivot and see if Nichka can get back on. I will go to you, Nancy. We know that there are multiple policing systems, and we know that CPS has a historic systemic racism problem. And it also tells a larger story about the criminalization of Black and Brown families, particularly the mothers. Tell me about your interaction with CPS and the impact that it had on you and your children's lives.
Hello, it's great to be here again. I was impacted because of anonymous reporting. But if I go back further, I was impacted as a child. You know, I was in foster care. I was removed from my mother's home and was in foster care when I was very young and until I aged out, so to speak. But in reality, I left. I left the foster care system because I kept hopping around from one place to another, you know, always with garbage bags, removing my clothes, taking off my clothes, putting back the clothes, traveling from different places. So it was, you know, a never ending journey, always moving from one home to another. And those homes were never loving. I always felt out of place. I always felt like I had to fight for everything and anything. So as I got older and became a young adult and got together with my husband, had kids with him, and ACEs came into my life because at the time, I want to say there was DV involvement, but I am a DV survivor as well. But at the time when they came, I was no longer with him. I had my own apartment. My kids were going to school. I had childcare. I was working. And all of a sudden, here comes a knock on the door from CPS with the cops because of a anonymous reporting. Many times those reports happen because of a jealous boyfriend, a next door neighbor, a teacher, whatever. So got the knock on the door, wasn't expecting for it. There was a bunch of cops in the hallway demanding me to come into my home. At that time, I didn't know what were my rights. You know, that was never really told in a clear way that I could, you know, articulate at that time. And so when I opened the door, you know, right away they want to interrogate my children, interrogate me, strip search them alone, put us all in different rooms, you know, look in the cabinets, look in the refrigerator, turn on and off the light switch to see if you have lights, um, see if you have a bed, you know, just doing so much of intrusive invasion of you know, your own home. And I felt like if I was a criminal, like I was committed of a crime that I didn't commit. And now my children were traumatized. In addition to that, you know, having a bunch of cops with badges and guns in your home is never a good look, especially when you live in a poor community and you've been traumatized in many different ways. That's just another level of trauma because they come in like a bunch of gangsters, interrogating you and, you know, just asking you a bunch of questions, being very, you know, punitive and accusations of things that you didn't do or things that they assumed that you did. And to make a long story short, they forced me to go into a shelter. Pretty much, they threatened me. The threat was that if I didn't go to a shelter, they would remove my children from me. That was the threat. That was the threat for me to leave everything I had, everything that I had going on for myself, for my children, to go into another system that is policing and surveillance family. That's what it is. Because when you go to those shelters, you know, they want to see what you're doing, what you're not doing, and give much access and much power for ACS just to come and just do what they want to do with you and your family. You know, they use those strategies to do that. And so that's what happened with me. And it did create a huge impact on my family, on my children at the time. My children are grown now; they have a whole family of themselves. But that's how I really got involved with advocating for families' right, like the Miranda Rights Bill, like the Anonymous Reporting Bill. You know, those bills are to help parents set them up for not only success, but to set them up to know what are their rights. Because many times, you know, they don't tell you what your rights are. They want to give you a whole bunch of services and give you TPR and do you have to go through court system. That was another thing. I had to go to court system. My son had his home law guardian. That was a whole nother issue. Is it was just too much. I lost a lot of sleep from it. It was just trauma after trauma, and I never felt safe. Never felt safe during the whole course of that interaction.
So talk to me, Nancy. You mentioned the bill. Can you go and give a little bit more context
Okay,
to the
so
bill?
the coalition, parent legislation coalition is coming is has a bill. It's called Miranda Rights Bill. It's for parents to know what's their rights, like getting legal representation from the start, or not, or knowing that you don't have to open the door. You really don't. That is your right, not to open the door. You could tell them, um, come back later. You could say we'll meet you down somewhere else, but you don't have to open the door at that moment. That doesn't mean that they're not gonna come. Sometimes they say we're gonna come with a warrant. I've heard parents also say they've gone so far to say they will break the door down if you don't let them in. Okay, so just think about that. That's the same thing law enforcement do, but now it's in cahoots with ACS, with the protectors, the child protective service that's coming into your home, the investigators, as we call them, that come into your home to do all this surveillance in your home and see what you got, what you don't got. So yes, those are some of the bills that we are advocating for and fighting for, and I think it is in, put they trying to put it out there. Hopefully, it will be a bill set in stone that parents will receive their rights and understand what their rights are and stop the anonymous reporting, because we know many of those calls come from an angry boyfriend, a family member, a next door neighbor. They could just make those calls. They don't have to tell them their name and say, oh, this one, the mother, yeah, she was beating those kids, or, the kids always be screaming, or, they be smoking weed or drugs, or whatever stories they want to concoction with that. They use that anonymous reporting, to terrorize family. The system is many times used as a weapon, a tool to just oppress and suppress families, especially families of color, because a white family don't get that. They don't come in the same fashion that they will come into my house, or maybe any of us here, your houses, and ring the doorbell. They come in very punitive, very demanding, degrading, disrespectful. They don't come in with a white person. One real quickly, they got a lawyer, is done because they got legal representation from the start. Many of us do not get that because lack of resources, because lack of knowledge, because of, like, we don't have the funds that we need to do that. Because of many things, trauma and poverty as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Nancy. I think that kind of trauma lives with people for the rest of their lives. So I'm glad to hear that, your family, you and your family, your children are doing well and persevering through that, because we know that a lot of times that type of trauma can really detriment somebody's life. So thank you for sharing that. Keita, so happy to see your face. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about your book, Bending the Arc. You talk about in your book how America operates on two distinct justice systems, one for the wealthy and one for the Black and brown. Can you talk to me about your experiences as a public defender and what that looks like for Black women and girls coming through the system?
Hey, I'm Starlin. It's good to see you and good to see everyone else. Thank you for inviting me to be here to talk about, this important topic about Black women mattering, right? A lot of times, we talk about the criminal legal system, and sometimes we forget, that women have different needs and there are different issues that women face in the criminal legal system. So, and I think in light of, everybody being up in arms about Roe v. Wade being overturned, just last week. Well, actually, yeah. And so I think that this is a very timely conversation, to talk about, not only that, but talk about Black women in the criminal legal system. And, and I think sometimes what we forget, or maybe some people don't even know, is that when we are talking about, women having the right to choose, when we're locking women up, and particularly Black women, for extended periods of time, they don't have that same choice of whether they want to come out and whether they want to have kids. So their right is automatically taken from them when we're sentencing them, to extreme sentences. And so I think that is something that we should be cognizant of as we are moving forward and as we are talking about, what we're going to be doing as far as Roe v. Wade is concerned, because we cannot address that without addressing the mass incarceration of Black women and our brown girls, right? And so I just wanted to put that out there. As you mentioned, I am a former public defender in Nashville, Tennessee. I am also directly impacted. Worked as a public defender for 6.5 years, and clearly saw that, yes, there are two different systems at play here. And I think anybody that does this work understands that, is that we do have one system for the wealthy and then another system for poor people and Black and brown people. And I saw that not only with my situation, but also it was evident every single day practicing as a public defender. And so as it relates to my situation, I was a young Black female who ended up having to go to federal prison for a crime that I did not commit. A boyfriend told me that he was sending me cell phones and pagers, and turns out it was not cell phones and pagers, but marijuana. And so the judge sentenced me, after my jury trial, the judge sentenced me, someone who had never had any exposure to the criminal legal system, someone who was in school at the time, majoring in criminal justice and psychology, came from a very good home. She sentenced me to 7 years in federal prison, right? And so what's important when we're talking about Black Women Matter and talking about this two, system that's at play here, there was a white girl who robbed a bank, and was in front of the very same judge, and this judge sentenced her to less time than I did. Right? She committed a violent crime, and my crime was a conspiracy marijuana offense, which marijuana is, legal in a lot of places across this country now. She sentenced me to more time than someone, who robbed a bank. And it was, she didn't see the value in me, right? She talked to me and basically told me that, number one, she was not impressed with my attitude. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but like, what does it have to do with, I'm saying, anything, with me coming in front of this court? And I am also fighting for my life here, right? So, that was one of the things. And so, and we see it every day where Black women, in this criminal legal system, we are criminalized, for having an attitude in the workplace. We hear about Black women being called angry and aggressive, right? So that right there was just, when she told me she didn't like my attitude, that was just perpetrating this narrative that we already have about Black women, and particularly Black women in the criminal legal system. And, and so that was my situation with my particular judge. She looked at me as if, I had these things that Black people should not have. And so somehow I was able to, be in school on the dean's list, about to graduate, with a degree in criminal justice and psychology, never exposure to the criminal legal system, from a 2-parent household. It was just like, how dare you, like, Black people don't have these things and you have them. And so how dare you be in front of me, right? And so it was all of these stereotypes that I faced when I was dealing with this particular judge, who was a white progressive female. And then, working as a public defender, I saw all the time, like, my Black female clients, like, how they were treated. I talk a little bit in the book about one of my clients, and she was a Black female, and she had drug issues, and, and had been trafficked and all of those types of things. And so we were trying to get her into one of the treatment programs. And it took so long to get her into the treatment program. It took longer than it normally takes, that it would take for like my white female clients to get in there, because they could easily understand that these white women had been trafficked. But this Black girl, well, she just wanted drugs. Like, there, it was just the way that she was treated compared to the way that my white clients were treated was just unbelievable. Not only by the judge, but also when I finally got her into the treatment facility, the way that she was treated in the treatment facility. They accused her of, constantly stealing, and, and saying she didn't want to be in the program. She didn't want to work the program. And I had to have a conversation with them, and I had to tell them, it's like, look, you know what, how about you all do an individualized plan for her? Like, her needs are different from her white counterparts that's in this program. And so I think we don't really look at that, right? It's just like, in this criminal legal system, there's no value in Black bodies, and particularly Black women, I've had the DAs, use curse words about my Black clients, calling them bees and just everything, that I had to correct. And if I wasn't there, I can't even imagine what these women would have experienced, just because again, like, just the lack of respect, the lack of dignity that was shown them in the entire criminal legal system.
Yeah, I can't imagine, myself being impacted. Like, you're going from a defendant to now defender. And so the things that you witnessed in that courtroom, I can't even imagine. But since, like I said before, since you've been on both sides, what steps do you feel need to be taken first? I mean, obviously there's been some steps and we've had a little bit of progress, but what, from your perspective and experience, what are the steps that we can take to implement real systemic change in this country?
So the thing is that anytime there's change, like, there's only change when it is going to impact everyone, right? We don't get change simply because it is an issue that is impacting Black people, right? Or impacting women. It's all lumped in together. And so I think that while we do get change, I think that that slows up our progress. And I think that we also have to recognize that women have different needs in this criminal legal system, right? We have a lot of women that come into the system who are the primary caretakers. And so what are we doing about that? What are we doing to keep families together? We see a lot of times, that with, people that are able to afford it, they're able to go to counseling, they're able to do this and do that, take all of the classes, and they're able to keep their kids. Whereas if you have, a Black woman who may not have the same resources that's available to her, well, then she may end up losing her kids. Her kids may end up going into the foster care system. And then we know how the foster care system is, and the cycle just continues, right? And so we need to, first of all, make sure that we have the same resources available for everyone, right? Whether they can afford to pay for them or not. That's first and foremost. And again, and so one of the things that we did here, because I work at Free Hearts, which is a local organization here that is led by directly impacted women. And so we passed a bill called the Primary Care Bill, and other states have also passed it, which is an alternative to incarceration. So instead of sentencing someone who is a primary care provider for their family, instead of sentencing them to prison, this is a way that the attorneys can use this as an alternative to incarceration, so that they don't have to go to prison, so that we can keep families together, so that kids do not end up in the foster system, so that kids don't end up lost in these systems, and we don't continue to perpetrate this whole cycle of violence that has been, enacted upon the Black families, from the moment that we stepped foot on this soil over 400 years ago, right? And so that's the thing, is, just trying to do what we can to alleviate the harm that has been perpetrated against our Black families. And I think that that is one of the ways that we can start there, is with the primary care bill. And like I said, we have it here in Tennessee. There are several other states that have it and that are looking into that. But also, too, I think that it is important that we humanize Black women. There has been a dehumanization of Black women, again, from the moment that we have set foot in this country. We can go back to slavery and look at how Black women have been treated, from, again, like I said, from the moment that we came to America, and just how we have been dehumanized, right? Just over the centuries. And so we can start with humanizing Black women. We can start with that, right? Because again, I have seen in the criminal legal system the lack of humanity for our Black women, the way that Black women are treated, the way that we are creating laws that are snatching up Black women and just constantly putting them into the criminal legal system. It was so bad where the conspiracy, law, it was called the girlfriend law, right? Because there were so many women that was being caught up in that. And so as we're talking about new laws that is being enacted in a lot of places come tomorrow, July 1st, is that we need to look at these bills, right? And if there is anything that has conspiracy attached to it, like, that doesn't even need to be considered, because like with conspiracy, like, it just lumps up a lot of people. And like I said, and it is with that conspiracy charge, there were so many women that were getting caught up in that. There were so many women that was in federal prison under conspiracy charges. Starlin, I'm sure you know where you were. There were so many women there. We've seen the rise of women in incarceration, and a lot of it is because of that, right? And so I think that we need to be looking at those things, right? And so the women who got a lot of time under these conspiracy charges, like, they need to be like first, like on these clemency lists, right? In their states and in the federal system in order for them to be able to come home and to be reunited with their families. And so those are just some of the things that I can do. But regardless of what we do, first and foremost, we have to start with humanizing Black women.
I agree. I agree. And I'm not as familiar with you as the bills and the legislation and things like that, but I think honestly from the top all the way down, conspiracy just needs to be thrown out because there's no need for that. It doesn't really go in a state courtroom, so why allow it in a federal? So are you saying that they're looping conspiracy inside of these bills and that we just don't know about it when these bills are coming out?
Well, I mean, they talk about it freely on the federal level, with wanting to expand, conspiracy. And so that's something that people definitely need to be aware of, because at the end of the day, when we're expanding conspiracy, it is always Black and brown and low income communities that are the ones that are going to be impacted by it. And again, I think we can look at the conspiracy charges as it relates to drug charges, and we see that women are the ones that are the most impacted by those as well too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always say, especially with those exact exuberant sentencing, that is just modern day genocide on Black women, because like you said before, you can go in at 20 and get a 20-year sentence. When you come out, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to have children at that age, and I've seen that over and over again. So yes, thank you, Kita, for that. I'm gonna circle. Nishka, can you? Hi, can we hear you? Oh no, we can't hear you. No. Okay, so we will go to Shay. How are you doing, Shay?
I'm great, Starling. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm excited to be on the panel. Keita, it's good to see you again. Um, and it's just wonderful to see like minded women with vision coming together to move things forward. So I'm just really excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. So this kind of moves right into what our next topic was, and we're talking about the extreme sentencing that disproportionately impacts and harms Black women. And we know that there's a lot of things that go in place, and there's system actors as far as the prosecutors and the judges. And like we mentioned before, they're more likely to treat crimes as violent when they are crimes committed by Black people. There's less leniency for Black women who face the burden of these extreme sentences, especially when compared to white women. So, Shalana, you received one of the highest sentences in this country for mortgage fraud. Your sentence was outrageous in part to your white counterparts. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, in 2005, I was actually in 1998, I began practicing real estate law. And subsequently in 2004, I was indicted along with several of my clients, the mortgage brokers, the appraisers, and investors. I was the only closing attorney. And there were problems with the loans. There was some flipping going on. But as far as I ended up going to trial because I was not involved in a conspiracy with these people. And so I took an oath to uphold the system. And so I'm like, to trial and defend myself. Well, unfortunately, I had a difficult relation during the trial process that now I understand happened to me. It can happen to anyone. As far as the way that they choose to charge the prosecutors. In my case, when I didn't plead, they came back with a superseding indictment in which they gave me a count for everything that was wrong with the file, whether the person's name was Jane G. Doe and they didn't put a G. They gave me a count for that. So my second indictment, the superseding indictment, ended up being 171 counts. And at that point, I knew that I didn't have a good chance of surviving, but I'm a fighter. And they didn't offer me a plea. The government came in and said, well, we'll talk about a blind plea and you could possibly get 20 years. Now, I graduated from law school in 1996, so I hadn't been practicing that long. never been in trouble, never had detention, never had a traffic ticket. And here I am facing 20 years. And I told my lawyer, I said, well, what do I get if I go to trial and lose? He says, well, you could get 30 or more. And I said, well, I have to try to fight. And ultimately, I was convicted at trial, and the judge sentenced me to 360 months. He said that he was holding me responsible as a lesson to other attorneys that, and he used these words. He says, for attorneys that choose to eat at the trough of greed, you guys will now be put on notice. So I don't know any biological entity that eats at a trough other than an animal. So at that point, I knew exactly, and I could tell through the whole trial, the disdain that the judge had for me, what the prosecutor had for me. But I was really just shocked. But I really shouldn't have been, because it's something that I encountered as a practicing attorney, where I would go to appear in court, and my client would be a white male, and we would go up when they call the calendar, and the judge would ask my white male client, okay, what's she here for? Even though I'm in a suit with a briefcase, it was assumed that I was the defendant. So there are, it's a very partialized system, and it is very unfortunate. And what Keita was saying about how pleas are offered, sweetheart deals are offered to certain people, and a lot of our Black and brown people are not given those same options, and we are villainized and criminalized for, if you had a fight in the 8th grade, they can go back in your PSR and in your pre-sentencing report and want to say that you're a violent person because you had a fight in the 8th grade, and the student, the school services officer wrote it up, and you ended up with in-school suspension. It was no big deal. But when they're looking to say that you're a violent person, they go all the way back. And these are not facts that are found by a jury. This is just something that they go in and they look and they say, well, this comes into your factors that we look at when we're sentencing you. But the factors of everything that you've done on the good side are often overlooked. As a woman, they're not allowed to count the fact that you are giving up your childbearing years if you're serving the sentence. With me, I went in when I was 35, and when I came out, I was 51, so no longer able to have children, and that counted for nothing. And had I served my entire sentence, which was a total of 30 years, is what he gave me as a deterrent. However, a year and a half later, there was a bigger real estate fraud case, and the attorneys in that case, who were white males, the losses in my case were 11 million. In their case, it was 20 million. And these attorneys have been practicing much longer than me. They received, one received 41 months and the other one 24 months in federal prison, and I got 360 months. And even on appeal, the appellate court said, well, we do understand that her sentence is harsh, but it does fall within the guidelines, so we're going to uphold it. So there was nothing given to the fact that, they deemed me to be disposable. And that's how I feel that the criminal justice system treats Black and brown women in particular, like we're just disposable. And it is so wrong. And I think the way that what we have to do is, when these judges on the state level, particularly where they're elected, we need to look at what their track records are. They run for election, and if we find that they're not being fair and impartial with the sentencing of our children, we need to get them out. And on the federal level, when they go up for federal confirmation, we need to talk about what it is that is happening, so that when they go before for their confirmation hearings, if they have a track record for overly sentencing Black and brown people. And it's not hard to determine if that's the case. I mean, the race of the defendants. Now, with Hispanic defendants, it's a little bit different, because on the federal level, when they go into the Bureau of Prisons, they are counted as white. And so that mucks it up a little bit, because then they get to skew the statistics and say, oh, no, white people are getting sentenced to this amount, but they're Hispanic, they're not white. And I don't understand why that category has not been corrected, but we all know why when we look at the bigger picture. But we have to look at policy and legislation, and we have to hold our judiciary branches accountable. If Roe v. Wade hasn't shown you that each of these people during their confirmation hearing said that they would uphold Roe v. Wade, and then as soon as they get an opportunity to strike it down, they all came together. So that just says, was it where, they answered the question under oath. So was that perjury or not? you know so it's just a lot, and we have to get more people that look like us on the judicial benches as well. uh, and a lot of us, when we come out, we are struggling. We're not offered the big law firm jobs. We end up pretty much going into private practice a lot of times, and we find our way, or we go into the public defender's office to the point that we are so overwhelmed we get burned out. And we just have to do more, and we have to, as we are speaking to young Black and brown uh, law students, we need to give them the truth about what it is that they're going to be facing. Because I was very naive when I came out. I was so happy to have my degree and have passed the bar, but I had no idea of what I was into. And so we need to have mentoring programs. We need to have feeder programs to help train these young warriors as they go forward, so that they can effectively defend our Black and brown people.
Wow, thank you for that, Shay. Can you talk to me a little bit about what, because I mean, you're so educated, you're so intelligent, just to hear you speak. This is my first time hearing you speak on a panel, and you are full of knowledge. So like, being that you did that much time, what advice can you give to someone who might have a mother or a sister or someone who they love that is in a similar situation right now, that is fighting for their life and fighting for their freedom?
Well, during the 16 years that I actually served, I would not have made it if I did not have the support of my family and friends and my faith. So the thing about it is that you have to find your point of reference, whatever that may be. If if you believe in a higher being, get closer to that being. If you believe in education, educate yourself. Um, and you have to understand, when you're inside, no one owes you anything. So a lot of times I'll hear girls say, nobody's writing me. Well, are you writing them? Are you, my daughter, when I went into prison, she was 3.5 years old. And when I came out, she was 20. So, but I wrote her every week that I was in prison, to the point that she would sit on the front porch and wait on the mailman to come. And if you know anything about federal prison, you know that a lot of times they don't send the mail out when they're supposed to. So she would, when I would speak to her, she would say, Mama, I know you mailed my letter, but they did not have it. And I'm going to talk to the post office about where my letter is. And so at that point, I would always try to write two. So she would definitely have one coming. But she saved all those letters. And we have a great relationship, because when she could, at first she couldn't write. She would just color me scribble scratch pictures. And then the crayon started getting in the lines. And then, I got more things. But one of the things now in the federal system and in the state system, they're scanning the mail. So you don't even get that anymore. And that's, breaking a bond, particularly, that's hard enough for women to have with their children. But there's always a way to let your children know that you care, and let your family know that they care. We understand that we call for money a lot when we're on the inside, because it costs to live on the inside, and we don't make any money at all, which is why uh, Congresswoman Nikema Williams' new bill about the Abolition Act, which would require that they pay us livable wages on the inside and not be able to work us for free, is so important. So I would ask everybody to please get behind that. But, we ask our families to send in to us so that we can buy soap, sanitary napkins, shampoo. And the shampoo costs the same as it does at Walmart, plus a 30% markup on the federal level. So it's expensive. So, but if your family can't afford to do that, they can just send you a card or a letter or a postcard just to let you know that you're not forgotten, because that is the biggest thing on the inside, is feeling like you are forgotten. And if your family doesn't have to be blood. Family can be friends. Family can be, I have so many prison children that I still reach out to, and I mentor. And women tend to build families on the inside to replace the ones on the outside, or to substitute for the ones on the outside. I don't know that they could be replaced, but you can also write to ministries. I had different people from churches that would write me faithfully to keep me inspired, that I could talk to when I just felt like I can't do this one more day. And I had one lady that said, you don't have to do one more day, just do one more minute. And then, and then it grows. And so sometimes you just have to take a minute. I can't tell you how many times I would go into the shower and just cry. And then, I suck it up and come on out, because what else are you going to do? But I continued to pray, and my faith grew. And that is when people say, well, what was it that got you out? I have to say God, because I didn't know how I was going to get out. Whoever would have thought that Donald Trump would sign my clemency on his last day in office out of the thousands of people that applied? I didn't have any influence. I was just a regular little person from Valdosta, Georgia, that didn't know anybody, but I wrote everybody that I could think of. If I saw a name in the magazine that said anything about criminal justice, I mean, it was to the point that I used to have to get special permission to get extra stamps, because I would write and tell my story. I wrote Lester Holt so many times. NBC wrote me back and said, Dateline is not accepting submissions at this moment. However, we do have your story on file. But, I just kept advocating for myself, and my family kept advocating for me. And my daughter, I remember, sent $10 to a lawyer she saw in the paper, and it turned out to be Ben Crump and Daryl, his partner, and she sent them $10 to represent me. And they actually came to the prison to see me. They sent her $10 back, but they came because they were so moved by that. And she was like 9 years old at the time, but she heard me talking to my mother at visitation about how I had gone to college with them, and I was so excited about the fact that they were, really doing some things on civil rights legislation. And she heard that, and I guess she knew enough to get on the internet and look up their address, and she put $10 in an envelope and mailed it to them with my information and said, can you please help my mommy come home? And Daryl Parks came to see me. And that was a bond that was forged to this day, where, they remember me, and now I'm able to contact them if, people that I know need assistance. And it's all about networking as well. I met Keita in DC a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about some things that we were going to do. You and I, Starling, are both FAMU Rattlers, and we talked about some initiatives. It's all about networking. No one is an island, and no one is alone. So if you feel that way, reach out. We will connect you. The Loam is wonderful with networking and connecting, and we will find someone to support you. And that's really all that it takes. And you have to fight for yourself. No one is going to do it for you. And it's not anyone else's responsibility. You got yourself there, either through intent or negligent friendships, or whatever you want to call it. We have to be accountable and be responsible about what it is that we've done. I made some bad mistakes when it came to my practice, things that if I could go back, I would totally redo, but I didn't do what they said in my indictment, but I was convicted of it. And at some point I was like, you know what? I don't care. You can say that, I kidnapped Kermit the Frog. I don't care. I just want to come home. And then when I get home, I'll straighten out the story. So I have a book that will be coming out soon that's going to tell the whole story and talk about the justice system overall. But the abuse that goes on inside, I've witnessed, I've experienced. When I was in the county jail, they brought us back from court in a van, and they call it the dog catcher van, because there's a big, it's like an Econoline van, and down the middle of it, there's a metal grate, and they put the men on one side and the women on the other. And I was the only woman that day, and it was in August, and the van had to be 120 degrees on the inside, and they put us in the back without starting the air or anything. and I'm asthmatic. I couldn't breathe. The guys on the other side started beating on the window to tell the officer that we needed air, and I passed out. And all I know is that I woke up in the infirmary, and my whole jaw was purple. And I found out later from one of the guys when I saw him at medical that they grabbed me by the wrist, the ankle chains, and just drugged me out of the back of the van, and my face hit the bumper. And thank God I didn't lose any teeth or break a jaw. But that was the abuse, and I had a knot on my head, but I didn't know what was going on. But it's not unusual to see women abused, with hard takedowns that are unnecessary, with being pepper sprayed, with being tasered. And oftentimes there are other women that are, are victims. So there's just a lot that we need to work on. And it's a group effort.
Thank you, Shay. So powerful. I look forward to that book coming out, and I would love for Keita to just, before we go into Nishka, because she's on now, to tell people, because we have people asking where they can get your book. Keita?
So my book is available on my website. It is www.keitahaynes.com. That is KEEDAHAYNES.com. And there is a link there that will take you to Amazon where you can board the book.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Nishka. Can we hear you now? Oh, I think she's frozen.
Hello.
She is frozen.
Hearing?
So
Hear me?
we are going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for being here. The overwhelming majority of Black women who come into the contact with the criminal legal system, like we said before, has experienced deep trauma and harm in their lives. There are so many, hundreds of thousands, millions of Black women who are behind bars because they have been failed by not only the people that should have been able to trust, but also systems that should have supported them. Criminalization and incarceration cause more trauma and do not help people heal or increase public safety. Instead of perpetuating the cycles of trauma and harm, we can and should truly protect our communities by investing in the livelihood of Black women. We must advocate for systemic changes that would not only alter the lethality of police encounters for Black women, but begin to address the persistent discrimination in society that brings them into contact with police in the first place. Black women need access to healing and resources, not punishment. I'm going to see if we have any questions. We do have a question for Shay. Does your book have a working title or a website?
No website yet. The working title is Collateral Consequences. And, because of it goes so far reaching with what happens to when you send a mother to prison, it not only affects the children, it affects the entire family. And it is, and then when you reintegrate a mother back into society afterwards, she needs a tremendous amount of support, because you have a guilt factor that you feel for having left your children. And then they're angry, and they can be a little slick sometimes with how they, react. And you have to go through a healing process. And it's okay to say that you don't have it all figured out. I talk to a lot of ladies that have recently come home, and we talk about how we used to sit on our bunks, and all we would talk about is, oh, when I get home, it's going to be like this, it's going to be like that. And you never imagine the problem side of it, or your family expects you to be the same person that left, and you're not. hopefully you've grown a whole lot and you've learned and you've elevated yourself. So they're getting a new improved you that sometimes they don't like because they're used to the other one that maybe they could take advantage of, or that was the fixer that could solve everybody's problems. And you come out and you're like, no, I'm responsible for me and mine. And I'm going to move forward, and, I have to look out for me. And so you learn that it's okay to be a little selfish. You learn that in prison, particularly because if you're not a little bit selfish, then you won't have anything, because people will take everything from you. So it's fine to be giving of love and of the heart, but you have to also be selfish about what it is that you need to be able to move forward and to better yourself. And so when we come home, the families don't always know how to deal with us. And depending on how long you've been gone, like me, I was gone for a decade and a half. A lot of things changed. From the technology part of it was just overwhelming. And I mean, I couldn't even operate the TV when I came home. And so it is an intimidation factor. But fortunately for me, one of the things that I learned in prison was humility. And Starling, I'll tell you guys in a minute, I don't know how to do this. How do we do this? What button do you click? And I will take notes and I will YouTube it and I will ask Siri and Alexa. And, I call my daughter constantly to, ask different things. And I still have not mastered social media. I'm trying, but, it is overwhelming.
I use it every day, and I have yet. I still, so you will never, it's
So
always
just try
changed.
to support the people when they come home, because a lot of times you feel like a person in a foreign country because so many things have changed. And but we will get through it collectively. We just have to show each other love and light, and and let everyone know that they're not alone.
Absolutely. And just because we have a few more minutes, and due to technical difficulties, Nichka was not able to join. And I'm really sad about that, because I wanted everyone to hear her powerful story. And for those of you who don't know, she is my mother, and she was a victim of police brutality in the 90s. Right at the time when it wasn't like it is right now. You don't see it on, you didn't have social media, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have all that. I was 8 years old, and that was my first real encounter with police in my life at that time. And that has still impacts me till this day. And then, incarceration has become generational at this point. So 15 years later, I found myself on the other side of the walls in a federal system. My mother was state, and she ended up taking a plea deal because they told her, if you don't sign this deal, you're going to do 10 years. And so she didn't want to be 10 years away from her family. She had, a public defender who she didn't feel was really representing her. So she took the deal. And when I found myself in that situation 15 years later, I kept thinking about my mother's story and how that one incident literally changed the trajectory of her life forever. It's still now, almost 25 years later, she's still healing and still trying to come back from that day of being beat by a police officer. So I could not bring myself to sign that deal. So like you, Shay, I went to trial. If I'm going to lose, I'm going to fight anyway. And I ended up losing. They superseded the indictment, all of the things that especially the feds do to get convictions, and manipulations, the lies, the what is it called, when the redaction of things and paperwork, all of these things that I learned while I was fighting my case. And since we're giving out websites and plugs, I might as well talk about my documentary Black Butterflies, which Keita is a part of. Her story is in that as well. And speaking with you, Shay, I think I need to get you in there too. But you can go to blackbutterflies.com and get involved. We are still fundraising, obviously, to create amazing film and documentary. It does take money. Stuff is not cheap, as we all know, every day. It costs so much money just to go outside now. But I just wanted to give a little context and, give some praise to my mother, because she is an amazing woman and she's come so far. And hopefully we can do another panel where you will be able to hear her story of overcoming police brutality. But if we don't have any, I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat. I'll ask if anyone has any final thoughts that they want to leave the audience with. No? No, well, I will just say that we Black women matter, and as long as we continue to stick together and continue to come in community and keep advocating and fighting for our sisters and using our stories to elevate those and also use it to change laws and legislation, then we're headed in the right direction. So thank you all for being here and taking your time out, and to the audience who is watching. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a blessed and amazing night and 4th of July weekend. Even though it's not my Freedom Day, but still it's the day off of work. So, all righty. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.